Thank you for taking a few minutes to view our discussion on implementing cybersecurity. Our focus today is going to be on the factory floor and creating islands of automation, as I like to call them, or what we're going to call it here in our presentation today is zones of defense for your automation products on your factory floor. So I'm David Ellers. I'm with PowerMation. I am in the business development group, and my responsibilities fall on the Phoenix Contact product line, focusing on automation products such as networking, network security. Terry Busch with PowerMation is also in our business development group with a focus on IIoT technologies from remote connectivity and other cybersecurity protection devices. So in recognition of Cybersecurity Month, Terry and I were talking about some of the changes that have happened and have come out, or new recommendations for implementing cybersecurity on the factory floor. And especially when you look at the JBS ransomware attack that happened, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware that happened and really hit big in the news, and then most recently CASIA, who's an IT provider, and even locally here for us in our territory, Iowa Grain Co-op was attacked with a cybersecurity ransomware attack. So Terry, as we begin, really through the 90s and early 2000s, even today, IT groups are discovering Ethernet products out on the factory floor, and they say, well, if it's Ethernet, I've got to put it onto my network, and so that network's been growing. So as we look at that, what does a LAN look like now?
Yep, a lot of computers, MES systems, PLCs, HMIs, and the traditional method was just get it on the network. So one big, massive, maybe 10 dot something network, all these devices can talk to each other because by default, a local area network is peer-to-peer communication. So at any point I can print to a printer or I can attach to a PLC when I'm sitting at my desk. The big challenge is that when you have those types of systems in play, a bad actor can infect one computer and now he can run all around the whole facility because it's peer-to-peer, what we call lateral movement within a facility. And some of the ransomware attacks are seeded through remote desktop protocols and other types of protocols that are very vulnerable, and they're finding more and more of these vulnerabilities every day. And that's how these bad actors get throughout a whole facility. So again, LANs are peer-to-peer and lateral movement is your enemy.
So lateral communication on LANs is really the easiest way for a hacker to move across an entire network.
Correct. And so the recommendation is to take networks with that lateral movement in mind and make them as absolutely as small as you possibly can. So for example, if you've got a PLC talking to an HMI and they're just doing some local control, maybe make that one network. And maybe you've got some SCADA systems out there that are talking to other devices, maybe MES, make that a network. Maybe make your office environment a completely separate network. For example, the Colonial Pipeline, their office was hacked, their office was ransomwared, but their OT, the pipeline, was still untouched. Unfortunately, they couldn't run the pipeline without their office environment, so they did have to shut it down. But they did have barriers in there like the zone defense that we're talking about.
So with the zone defense plan, or again, like I like to call it, islands of automation, how do we go about moving and actually implementing that? Do we need special switches or what is it?
Good point. So the default is switches, and that's where everything talks to one another on a LAN. And so now you're moving away from this massive LAN into sub-segments or smaller segments. And the challenge is to take what would normally be maybe an IT closet switch, 48 ports, and you triple stack them, right? You got six.
All seen that. Sure.
You got a whole bunch of ports in there, and you're trying to figure out, well, how do we manage that? So one option, which a lot of IT departments get into or start going down, is VLANs. The problem with a VLAN is that you're going to be segmenting those switches, but they still all land back in that IT closet. And VLANs, by default, you're going to set up a configurations to say VLAN A can talk to VLAN B. And so really what you're doing is you're limiting your traffic via static routes. And those static routes are still wide open by default. So then you say, well, I need to limit traffic from LAN A to LAN B, and you have to create something called an access control list. So a person comes in and they need to sit at their desk and they want to have access to a PLC. The IT manager has to say, well, this person, Terry or Dave, can now connect to this PLC out on the floor. And the IT department doesn't really want to deal with that. That's an awful lot of work, awful lot of involvement of allowing person A to talk to device B. And that can be a lot of work.
Right, and that access list that you're talking about can get rather massive.
Absolutely.
The more islands or zones of defense that you have, the bigger that access list is, the bigger the VLANs are. And I've actually been in a facility where they were implementing that they were having some trouble. I did a network scan, and I'm seeing all this VLAN traffic, and I asked, well, why am I seeing all this traffic in my network capture? He goes, oh, well, we have a switch on the network that doesn't support VLANs.
Yeah.
So here they implemented it all, but they have a device that
And
failed.
I worked on a specification where the customer said, we need a switch that can support 1,024 VLANs. An IT manager with 1,024 VLANs that he's managing is a monumental, daunting task. And I told him respectfully, I said, you don't really need a switch that handles 1,024 VLANs. You need a better specification. The other side of it would be just, okay, let's not use a VLAN, let's use a router. Well, for all practical purposes, a VLAN and a router do the same thing. They're routing traffic from network A over to network B, so that doesn't really gain you anything either. Another option on these zones is, okay, let's say that you had a facility and you had all of these devices connected together, all this peer-to-peer communications. In going through and changing, like in a VLAN or a router, you're changing every IP address of every device in your facility might not be something you can do. Maybe it's in a medical device manufacturer or something where you've got to validate all of your settings, and if you change your settings, you have to revalidate.
Right.
So one of the options that we have is to be able to do what we call a stateful firewall, or what the industry calls a stateful firewall. The nice thing about the stateful firewall is you can keep your existing IP address schema, but then you allow traffic to flow out, and then if a traffic packet goes out, a corresponding packet is allowed to come back in again.
So then I don't have to change any of my IP addresses. I use the stateful firewall
Correct.
to control the traffic flow.
It doesn't give you the user access that we talked about. So there's still the user access component side where you wouldn't be able to limit, for example, Dave or Terry to get access to it. But what it does do is it limits the bidirectional traffic that could go across that LAN, whereas a VLAN device or a router device is generally not going to prevent the traffic from going one direction. They allow traffic bidirectionally.
So there's some recommendations from some studies that have been out. Why don't we discuss some of those?
There have been? Where did
Isn't that in your
So one of the things that's really nice about the stateful firewall, some of the products that are out there today, and we have a couple in our portfolio, is that you can run it in learn mode. And what learn mode allows you to do is learn the traffic. So you could go in there and say, well, I'm going to have this system set up, and I'm going to learn the traffic. And you look at the traffic packets, maybe Modbus from this HMI to that PLC or something like that. You run it in that learn mode for a while. Is it called learn mode?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's called learn mode. And then once you say, okay, right now we want to put it in production mode. And when you then flip it to production mode, it'll drop any other packets that fly across that network so that you're able to then limit what happens. The nice thing about that is I had an inquiry from a customer yesterday that said, hey, I want to be able to have these two devices talk to each other. Do you know what port number that software package talks across? And I had to go through the internet and I had to Google it and all that other stuff. And I found out, oh, it's port 32,000. Well, when you run it in learn mode, it automatically will capture that traffic and say, hey, that's the port that needs to be open. And then you lock it down after that. And then in addition to that, those types of tools also have the ability to do syslogs. So that if you are hacked or if there is a bad actor in your facility, those log files can be pushed up to a log server and you can go back and look at that post event and see what happened and where this traffic was coming from to try to isolate these types of
and then the key there is
events.
you're pushing that traffic out of the
Correct.
collection device rather than going down and trying to collect it, so it makes the traffic easier. Again, it's outbound traffic that's allowed, inbound traffic being prevented.
Correct. So then the next step, which is more that utopian step that we always talk about, right? That utopia we're trying to drive towards, is to put a router in every control panel. And I like to use analogies, and one of them would be you put a router in your home to protect your home from the bad things that are out on the internet. What that means is your neighbor could be doing all kinds of bad stuff on the internet, hacking, ransomware attacks, viruses and everything, but his home network, his LAN, doesn't affect yours. And so because of that, you're able to protect yourself with the NAT router. And then by default, the NAT router allows traffic to flow up. So if I'm inside my home, plug in my NAT router, I get access to the internet. He's inside of his home, plugs in his router, he has access to the internet. But there isn't lateral movement allowed between those local area networks. So I can't attach to his computer or printer and do anything.
We can
like
both
that.
see the same thing on the internet,
Exactly.
but neither one of us can see each other.
Absolutely. So obviously in a networking configuration perspective, you would have to pre-configure these types of networks. So this machine is going to be using this network, the next machine is going to be using that network, and so on and so on. So again, if you had a system in play, local area network with hundreds of thousands of devices, it would take you months to be able to convert everything over to use the NAT router schema, but it is a better way of deploying your systems. And by default, NAT routers allow traffic to move up. So another concept is, okay, we've got these different local area networks, these different control panel networks, manufacturing, office networks, and we want to be able to put these together into something that could be maybe a manufacturing network, a manufacturing system, if you will, like a facility. It is okay and actually preferred to stack these LANs. And if you think about stacking them, you might have a control panel deep down inside of a plant running a machine. Above that, you might have a manufacturing network. And then above that, you might have an office network. And then above that, you have the network that's the internet. And that's called the Purdue Model. It's been designed and talked about in
Well, IT circles for quite some time, right?
IT circles, but what is the official, like a white paper?
No.
We'll have to put that on the cutting
Is this
room
a
floor.
peer-reviewed?
It's a peer-reviewed.
Industry standard?
A peer-reviewed industry standard called the Purdue Reference Architecture, where you layer your assets. And the idea behind it is that you have that model. The asset you need to protect the most is at the very bottom. The asset that is the most vulnerable is at the top. And so I like to use an analogies and when I talk to folks to get them to understand these types of concepts. And one of them is your house. So in front of your house you have a sidewalk, and that would be maybe a level 5. That's as dirty as the internet, or is the internet. Inside of that you have your yard, right? And so the neighborhood kids can play in your yard and whatnot, but the strangers are supposed to stay on the sidewalk. And then you might have a level 3 system that's maybe your couch or maybe your front bathroom. Acquaintances come over, friends come over and visit, and they're allowed to be in that area. And then you have a level 2 area, which is upstairs, bedroom, bathroom, or something like that for guests that come over. Level 1 is your bedroom. And finally, level 0, the most sacred, is your safe. Now, when you talk about stacking these assets, I don't think anybody would take their safe and put it out on a sidewalk, because that makes it very vulnerable.
Not a good place for it.
Not a good place for it. So what you do is you put your safe in the bedroom, because they have to get into the bedroom to get access to the safe.
Which then means they need to get up the stairs
Up
if it's a
the
two-level
stairs,
house,
and
across the living room,
Exactly.
through the front door, across the yard, and off the
Exactly.
sidewalk.
So you're layering or stacking your LANs to be able to protect them. And the challenge that you have when you stack your LANs is you're preventing traffic from flowing down. And so there are some MES and SCADA systems out there that require communications to a PLC.
So the stacking actually causes some problems for
Big problems.
customers on legacy systems that
And
are out
IT
there.
departments. And so in a traditional sense, our data is flowing bidirectionally. So an HMI or a SCADA system that's up a layer in a LAN is going to request information from a PLC. Now we took that PLC and put it on its own network. We put a NAT router on top of it, and now nothing can get access. So you really have two options. One is there's a feature called NATing in a NAT router that allows you to give a public IP address for a local resource. That's pretty common and pretty prevalent. However, you've just exposed that device inside that control panel to that IP address. And other, again, bad actors could get into the manufacturing zone and grab data out of the PLC. And there's been hacks involved in that where there's a software package that will look to see, is there a SCADA system running on this computer? And if there is, do bad things with the PLC. That was one of the hacks in Ukraine against the steel industry. So what you're able to do...
That was also Stuxnet, though, wasn't it, Terry? That was what it did. It looked for...
Correct. Look for the SCADA
systems.
system, and then it would attack the PLCs from the SCADA. Right. So what the solution is in the industry is we've been moving towards push protocols. And the idea is that anything inside the control panel, again, you can move traffic and move up. Anything in the control panel that needs to push data, harvests the data locally, stores it locally, and then pushes it up to the resource that needs it. The advantage to that is that resource could be in the manufacturing zone, could be in the office zone, or even on the internet. So we're able to deploy IIoT solutions with push protocols because a device way down inside that control panel can get all the way up into the Internet of Things. Another concept is what we call defense in depth. So not only do you have a system out there that has layers, but we also need to take a look at it as protecting those assets with layers of protection. And what it's really mean by the layers of protection.
I think you short-circuited there for a second.
Yes, I did
Yeah.
short circuit there for a second.
I was wondering what the
Why I
water
hesitated,
stand
because it
was.
says Shutterstock across my picture here.
So then there's another, other than the Purdue model, there's also a model that is called defense in depth.
Correct. And that's where you protect your assets with series of defense mechanisms. They sometimes call that the castle approach. And it's very similar to stacking the LANs, because we had mentioned earlier that there's different layers that you're going through with the stacking LAN, but you're actually stacking the obstacles. And so it's a little different thought process. And we use the analogy again from your home. Stacking the obstacles would be the police department's protecting the sidewalk. They're out there catching the bad guys and doing all that stuff. Maybe when you look at your yard, you've got a fence. The fence is protecting your yard. And then what's protecting the inside of your home is your front door. You've got the stairs protecting the upstairs, and you've got doors in the bedrooms and bathrooms upstairs, and finally the combination to the safe. So there's two topics that we just covered, and one is geographic locations. You put the safe physically upstairs in the bedroom, but you also need to have that defense mechanism wrapped around that safe, like a combination.
Right.
The bedroom is at the top of the stairs, but you still need the door guarding the bedroom. So both of those things combined give you that added security to be able to prevent bad actors from getting access.
So in
to
this
those
analogy,
assets.
the combination on the safe is that stateful firewall allowing the outbound traffic.
Yeah.
Same thing with the lock on the bedroom door. That is a different layer of stateful firewall that again gives us that outbound traffic allowance. And we could also pinhole then inbound traffic, or in the case of the stateful firewall, any response to that outbound traffic is automatically let back in.
Yeah, and so you think about, even from a house analogy again, the physical location of the safe is very important, and the key to the door, right? So the bedroom is upstairs at the top of the stairs, and the key locks it. So it's just extra added protection, and so that's what we sometimes call defense in depth strategies.
Or what we're really talking about here is, who do we trust at that point?
Correct, and there's the third thought process is what we call zero trust security. Zero trust security is you don't trust anybody. And oftentimes when I talk to IT folks about this, I think about what the TSA has to do at an airport. They have to assume everybody is a good guy, and they have to try to find that needle in the haystack bad guy. That's a daunting task.
Right.
And when you think about traffic in an IT department coming out of an office, that's really what office employment does. How many of you have gotten an email that says, hey, this is from the HR department, please click on this link? And as soon as you do that, the IT department gets notified and you get yelled at and you have to go through IT security training and everything else. Those are because they're assuming a complete and open office environment. Now, we don't have to do that deep down inside control panels. We can limit, we can verify explicitly. Only the controls engineer should have access to that control panel. Only the controls engineer should have the passwords for it and things like that. So when you verify explicitly in that zero trust model, we're talking about multi-factor or multi-step verification. Just about everybody that does online banking, or my Verizon account, for example, I log in and it sends me a text message, or it has an authenticator app that I have to then click yes, go ahead and let me into my account. Multi-factor. Also, biometrics is another way. So you've got your phone, maybe you push your thumb on your phone and that allows you to get in.
Or facial recognition.
Facial
now is
recognition.
getting to be a pretty hot topic.
The other is users least privileged access. And really what that means is only give people access to what they absolutely need. Do not give them any more. And that's really important because you don't want anybody having administrative rights on a computer to be able to go laterally move around the whole facility. And then always assume a breach, really. What you want to do is make sure that your LANs are small to minimize the blast radius, assume that you're going to get breached, and then also do ways of capturing traffic. So you can go back, post, and find out why we got hacked and that type of thing. And that's really an important part of that strategy.
You know, in looking at the who do you trust and limited access, for a long time on my own PC, once I set up my PC the way I needed it, I'd create another user account, assign that user the admin rights, and then my main account that I'd use, I'd take away my admin rights, so that those attackers that you stumble across can't easily get into your system.
And so if we follow that zero trust and use that home analogy again, we allow strangers on the sidewalk, and there's really no problem with strangers walking across the sidewalk. Neighborhood kids can play in the yard. Acquaintances can be in our living room, dining room area, maybe our front bathroom. Maybe we allow the in-laws to come upstairs, or maybe that would be a security violation, and it's only the friends of the family. Your kids can be in your bedroom, and only your spouse can get access to the safe. And if your kids were ever opening up your safe and rooting around in there, it would be a violation. If your in-laws are in your personal bedroom, it'd be a violation. So you have to have those types of mechanisms to be able to validate who that person is and give them only the rights that they have access to.
So then if we summarize that up, what does that look like then?
Well, the other part, though, before we get to the summary of that, we need to talk about the detection systems as well. And so what we're doing is we're saying, okay, what if somebody gets into that safe? What if they get into your bedroom? We need to have defense mechanisms. So if you use the analogy of a home again, you've got maybe Ring video doorbells monitoring people that are coming across, motion sensors, maybe even a door siren on the safe. So when you open up the safe, a siren goes off or some sort of ding that would notify you, hey, somebody's upstairs digging in my safe. And so not only do you need to set up those defense mechanisms, but you also have to assume that there's going to be a breach, assume that a bad actor is going to come in there, and you have all those recordings. And
that's the canary in the coal mine. There are companies out there that actually create what they call a canary server, which will sit on your network and look like some tasty morsel that an attacker would want. And as soon as that attacker goes in and starts looking around or rooting around those files, somebody gets an email or a phone call or a text message to get that on. So now, to summarize your points, what's the best way to do that? If some short takeaway for
short takeaway: stack your LANs. Well, first make your LANs very, very small. Stack your LANs, stack the obstacles, and trust no one.
There it is.
And that's all there is. And there ain't no more.
Trust no one. I like that. Well, thank you again for taking the time. I appreciate everyone that is watching this on our YouTube channel or some of our other multimedia platforms. We appreciate you. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. Follow our YouTube channel. There's a lot of great video content from our other business development managers.
And subscribe to our newsletter.
Subscribe to the newsletter as well. Have a great day.